The jungles of the Solomon Islands, August 1942. The air hung thick with heat and the stench of rotting vegetation. Amid the towering palms and choking vines, a new kind of warfare was being born, one where American steel would meet Japanese determination in battles so brutal, so merciless, that entire generations would carry the scars. But in those first desperate months of the Pacific War, America was losing. Island after island fell to the Emperor's forces, and the Japanese believed they had already won. They were about to learn otherwise. The M4 Sherman medium tank. 30 tons of American engineering, armed with a 75mm main gun and powered by a 9-cylinder radial engine that roared like thunder through the jungle. To the Marines who crewed them, these machines were lifelines. To the Japanese, they were myths, oversized American propaganda that would crumble under the first real test of combat. The Imperial Japanese Army had spent years perfecting their Type 97 Chiha medium tank, a nimble, light vehicle designed for the wide plains of Manchuria. It had crushed Chinese resistance. It had terrorized villages across Asia, but it had never faced the Sherman, Guadalcanal. The name itself would become synonymous with hell on earth. In August 1942, the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore on this remote jungle island, beginning America's first major offensive of the war. Their mission: seize Henderson Field, the strategically vital airstrip that could turn the tide in the Pacific. But the Japanese weren't about to let it go. Reinforcements poured in, supply lines stretched across treacherous waters, and deep in the jungle, our Japanese tank commanders prepared their ambush. Staff Sergeant Michael "Iron Mike" O'Hara had seen combat before, but nothing like this. A tank commander from Pittsburgh, he joined the Marines in 1939, back when war still seemed like someone else's problem. Now, sitting in the commander's cupola of his Sherman, nicknamed Steel Avenger, he scanned the dense jungle ahead. His crew was green. His gunner, Corporal Danny Rizzo, had never fired the main gun in combat. His driver, Private First Class James Tucker, barely knew how to navigate the muddy trails that passed for roads on Guadalcanal, but they were about to get the education of their lives. October 23, 1942. Intelligence reports indicated a major Japanese offensive was imminent. The Americans called it the Battle for Henderson Field. And what they didn't know was that Colonel Toshinari Shoji had assembled the largest concentration of Japanese armor in the Pacific Theater, over 30 Type 97 Chiha tanks, supported by infantry and artillery. His plan was simple: a massive nighttime assault that would overwhelm the American positions, recapture Henderson Field, and drive the Marines into the sea. The Japanese were confident. Their tanks had never failed them, but they had never encountered the Sherman. The first explosions came just after midnight. Japanese artillery pounded American lines as infantry surged forward through the darkness. O'Hara's tank platoon was positioned on the southern perimeter, engines idling, waiting. The radio crackled with frantic reports. Japanese tanks advancing, multiple contacts, all units engage. Dimpiru. O'Hara's heart hammered in his chest as he gave the order. Move out. The Sherman lurched forward, its tracks grinding through mud and fallen branches. Visibility was nearly zero. The jungle seemed to swallow every sound except the deafening roar of their own engine. Then, through the trees, O'Hara saw them. Silhouettes moving in the darkness, low, angular shapes that could only be enemy armor. He keyed the intercom. Target, tank, 11 o'clock. Rizzo's voice came back shaking but determined. Identified. O'Hara didn't hesitate. Fire. The 75mm gun erupted with a flash that lit up the jungle like lightning. The armor-piercing round screamed across the clearing and punched straight through the thin armor of the lead Chiha. The Japanese tank exploded in a fireball that turned night into day. For a moment, everything froze. Then all hell broke loose. Japanese tanks opened fire from multiple positions. Rounds pinged off the Sherman's hull, but the armor held. The Chiha's 57mm gun simply couldn't penetrate American steel at this range. But the Sherman's gun could penetrate anything the Japanese had. O'Hara called targets rapid fire as Rizzo worked the gun like a machine. One shot, one kill. Another Chiha erupted in flames. Then another. The Japanese couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their tanks, their pride, being torn apart by this American monster. Tucker drove like a man possessed, weaving between trees, crushing obstacles, positioning the Sherman for perfect firing angles. The tank's gyrostabilizer allowed Rizzo to fire accurately even while moving, a technological advantage the Japanese had never encountered. Chiha commanders tried to flank, tried to use their superior numbers, but it didn't matter. Every time they exposed themselves, the Sherman's gun found them. Every shot was devastation, but numbers still counted. More Japanese tanks pushed forward, trying to swarm the lone Sherman. O'Hara knew they couldn't stay stationary. "Keep moving," he shouted to Tucker. "Don't give them a shot." The Sherman rumbled through a thicket of bamboo, emerging behind a group of 3 Chihas that had been trying to circle around. Rizzo didn't even need the order. He fired, traversed, fired again, traversed, fired a third time. 3 Japanese tanks became 3 funeral pyres in the space of 15 seconds. The surviving Japanese tank commanders realized they were facing something beyond their experience. Some tried to retreat. Others charged forward in desperate banzai attacks, knowing their thin armor made them mobile coffins but hoping speed and courage might somehow prevail. It didn't. The Sherman's thick frontal armor, nearly twice as heavy as the Chiha's, made it virtually immune to Japanese fire. Meanwhile, every American shot was lethal. O'Hara lost count after the 12th kill. The jungle had become a nightmare landscape of burning vehicles and scattered wreckage. Japanese infantry, seeing their armor support disintegrate, fell back in confusion. But the battle wasn't over. A Chiha emerged from thick cover at point-blank range, its gun already trained on the Sherman's side armor, one of the few vulnerable spots. Tucker saw it first. He jerked the controls hard right, slamming the Sherman into a turn so violent that O'Hara nearly flew from the cupola. The Japanese round missed by inches. Rizzo rotated the turret and at a range of barely 30 yards, fired. The explosion was so violent it rocked the Sherman. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of the Japanese tank but twisted metal and flames. O'Hara's ears rang, his hands shook, but they were alive, and the enemy wasn't. By dawn, the battlefield fell silent. Japanese infantry had withdrawn into the jungle, leaving behind a graveyard of destroyed armor. O'Hara ordered Tucker to halt. He climbed out of the cupola, his legs unsteady, and surveyed the carnage. Burned-out hulks of Chiha tanks littered the landscape in every direction. He counted them. 28. 29, 30. His single Sherman had destroyed 30 Japanese tanks in one night of combat. When the after-action reports reached command, nobody believed them at first. 1 tank, 30 kills? It seemed impossible. But the wreckage didn't lie. Neither did the testimonies of infantry who'd watched the battle unfold. The Sherman had proven itself not just equal to Japanese armor, it was overwhelmingly superior. The myth of Japanese invincibility in armored warfare died on Guadalcanal that night. The Type 97 Chiha, for all its success in China, was hopelessly outmatched in the Pacific. Its 57mm gun couldn't penetrate Sherman armor except at suicidally close range. Its own armor, barely 25mm at its thickest point, was tissue paper against the Sherman's 75mm gun. Japanese tankers, brave as they were, found themselves in machines designed for a different war, facing an enemy they had no answer for. But the Sherman's victory wasn't just about technology. It was about crew training. American tank crews spent months mastering their vehicles before seeing combat. They drilled on gunnery until they could hit targets in their sleep. They practiced crew coordination until every command flowed seamlessly. The Japanese, by contrast, had rushed their armor units into combat with minimal training, believing that fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantages. On Guadalcanal, they learned the terrible truth. Courage without capability is just sacrifice. O'Hara and his crew fought through the rest of the Guadalcanal campaign, then island-hopped across the Pacific. Steel Avenger survived battles on New Georgia, Bougainville, and Peleliu. By war's end, O'Hara's confirmed tank kills exceeded 50. But he never forgot that night in October 1942, when 3 Marines and a Sherman proved that American steel could match and exceed anything the enemy could field. The M4 Sherman would go on to become the most produced American tank of World War II, with nearly 50,000 built. It fought on every front, from the deserts of North Africa to the hedgerows of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific. It wasn't the most heavily armored tank. It wasn't the most powerful, but it was reliable, mass-producible, and in the hands of a well-trained crew, absolutely lethal. The Germans called it the Ronson after the cigarette lighter because it lit up so easily when hit. But the Japanese had a different name for it. They called it the Unstoppable. After the war, O'Hara returned to Pittsburgh. He rarely spoke about his experiences, like so many veterans of his generation. But in 1987, at a reunion of Guadalcanal veterans, a former Japanese tank commander approached him through a translator. The man had been there that night in October 1942. He'd watched his entire unit destroyed by a single American tank. He'd survived only because his Chiha threw a track before entering the killing zone. Now, 4 decades later, He wanted to meet the man who had defeated them. The two veterans shook hands. Through the translator, the Japanese officer said something O'Hara never forgot. "We thought we were fighting machines, but we were fighting ghosts. Your tank seemed to be everywhere at once. Unstoppable. Invincible. We had never seen anything like it." O'Hara's response was simple. "We were just as scared as you were. We just had a better tank." The battle for Henderson Field raged for 3 more days after that first night, but Japanese armor never recovered from the devastating losses. Colonel Shoji's offensive collapsed. Henderson Field remained in American hands, and the tide of war in the Pacific began its long, bloody turn toward Tokyo. That single engagement, one Sherman against 30 Japanese tanks, became legend in Marine Corps history. It was studied in war colleges, analyzed by military historians, and remembered by the men who were there as the night American armor announced its arrival in the Pacific War. The Sherman wasn't invincible. Later in the war, it would face more formidable opponents, German Panthers and Tigers that outgunned and out-armored it significantly. American tank crews would pay a terrible price in Europe. But in the Pacific, against Japanese armor, the Sherman ruled absolutely. It gave Marines and soldiers the mobile firepower they desperately needed to crack enemy defenses. It turned the jungle warfare that had favored Japanese infantry into a mechanized nightmare for the Emperor's forces. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Hara received the Navy Cross for his actions on Guadalcanal. His crew received Silver Stars. Steel Avenger, riddled with dents and scars but still operational, finished the war in a tank park on Okinawa. It was eventually shipped back to the States and, like so many wartime vehicles, scrapped for metal. But the story survived. The impossible night when American steel crushed Japanese armor so completely that the enemy couldn't believe what had happened until they counted the burning wreckage at dawn. This is the story of men and machines, of courage under fire, and of a battle that changed the course of the Pacific War. This is the story of the Sherman tank that the Japanese couldn't believe until it crushed 30 of theirs and proved that American industrial might, combined with Marine Corps determination, was a force that no enemy could withstand. In the crucible of Guadalcanal, legends were forged in steel and fire. And one tank, one crew, one impossible night became a testament to the warriors who fought not for glory but for survival, for each other, and for the freedom of a world at war.